Go the fucking Tigers! Another round of AFL action is in the books, and there is a lot of fallout to deal with this week, including a huge mess up by the MRO that I feel is going to be appealed, and we could be looking at the dawn of ArghGodzirra 2.0. All of that and more discussed in today's video as we recap round 8 before diving into our tips for round 9. Sit back, relax, let's get this video underway. I had a really good tipping round for round 8. I was 20 seconds away from having 9 out of 9, the perfect tipping round. I got the late mail that Toby Green was a late out for GWS. I came to change my tip, and as I logged into the website, the game had started and I was locked out. Had I been 20 seconds quicker, I would have gotten my tip changed to the doggies and I would have been good, but we still locked 8 out of 9 up, and I think that's still a really solid tipping week. And the round opened up with Carlton taking on Brisbane. I tackled my tip with this game in the examples I gave in the previous video, looking at how the forward lines were going to stack up against the defensive structures of the opposition. We knew the midfield battle was going to be great because both teams are star-studded midfields, but on the flip side of things, Charlie Curnow and Harry Mackay are pretty much your only two standout avenues at Carlton up forward, whereas Brisbane, you know, you've got Charlie Cameron, you've got Eric Hipwood, you've got Joe Danaher, you've got Jack Gunston, Lincoln McCarthy when he wants to stand up. You've got a plethora of players you can go to, and at the end of the day, that's, I think, what set my viewpoint apart between these two teams, and it was the deciding factor in this game as well. I'm really starting to feel the one problem Carlton have is Harry Mackay and Charlie Curnow, and this is probably an unpopular opinion, so I would love to know what you guys think of this. I don't think they can coexist in the forward 50 together. Now, hear me out, because I'm not at all saying they can't play in the same team. I'm just saying when it comes to forward 50 entries, they cannot be in the forward 50 at the same time. They are getting in the way of each other. They are taking away marks from each other. It's kind of like, you know, with one rooster that's wanting to rule the roost, but Carlton have two roosters that want to take control, and they're inevitably getting in each other's way, and they're fighting with one another for that contest. And I think Carlton personally would operate better if Mackay played more of a Nick Riewoldt type role or a Matthew Richardson type role later in his career, where he can go further up the ground. He can be the link man between the wing and the centre half forward line, and let Charlie Curnow be that deep forward, you know, the one playing out of the goal square, the one that's going to give you the hit-up leads coming out of that square within the 50, and have Harry Mackay be that link-up man. He can still hit the scoreboard from the 50-metre line. We've seen Harry Mackay dob them from everywhere. But when Carlton are continuously bombing the ball in, and Harry Mackay and Curnow are getting in the way of each other, and they're getting underneath each other, it's not a good look, and I think that's one of the main reasons why Carlton have been struggling as much as they have in previous weeks. Brisbane, on the other hand, getting the ball rolling, just getting things done, and starting to really turn their fortunes around. This is the team that I predicted to finish number 1 overall, the team that I predicted to win the premiership this year. Early outlook on this team at the start of the season didn't look that way, but they've really turned it around, and I'm really loving just seeing how Brisbane are going about it, and they're sharing the load. They're not dependent on, you know, Lachie Neale in the midfield now to be able to, you know, win the contest and get things moving. They're not solely needing Joe Danaher to stand up tall in order for them to kick, you know, a big amount of goals to win games. They're the complete package, Brisbane, and they're really starting to click. The next game saw Richmond take on West Coast, and thank fuck, my boys finally notched up their second win of the 2023 season. We're still within the bottom 4-5 teams of the comp so far, but we are only a win out of the top 10, and then we're only 2 wins out of the top 8 currently, so Richmond's fortunes can change really quickly. I was a little bit nervy early on. West Coast kicking a couple of early goals and getting a lot of the ball, and I started to think it could be doom and gloom. You know, the thoughts go through my head. Do Richmond win the Spoon this year? And we can't even take Harley Reid as the number 1 pick because we've given the number 1 pick to GWS. But we got it done. And whether that is due to Jai Cully going down with an ACL and their bench becoming compromised, or Richmond just playing a better brand, whatever the case may be, it finally clicked with Richmond. And even though, you know, West Coast were controlling the game early, Richmond were finally able to turn it back on their terms and play a brand that I love to see. You know, Dion Prestia rarely kicks a goal a game, comes out and kicks 3 in a row, really integral in that turnaround. Shea Bolton has been missing pretty much all year and comes out with a best on ground performance when we need him to stand up. Dustin Martin starting to get more, you know, centre bounce entries and starting to play more midfield minutes, and that's starting to really have an impact. Tim Taranto and Jacob Hopper, I've been saying week in and week out, people have been putting the troubles of Richmond on their shoulders undeservingly, and yet again, both played really good games of football. I really hope this is a turning point for Richmond season moving forward, because I want to see us being more competitive and obviously winning more games. On the flip side, looking at West Coast, as I mentioned, Jai Cully goes down with an ACL, and it just adds to the ever-growing injury list that West Coast have this season. I think Rhett Bazzo is available to come back from concussion, and there's talk about a couple of other players maybe in the mix to return. Something's got to give for these guys, because I think we pardoned them through the COVID year, and this year they'll get a pardon for the injury list, but I don't know. I said it last week and I'll say it this week. Where do we go from this point with the West Coast Eagles? Geelong took on Adelaide at GMHBA Stadium and got the job done by a few goals in the end. It was a really good game of football to watch. My takeaway from this game was, in a season where the umpires and the MRO and the AFL have been so wanting and needing to protect the head, there were many instances in this game that weren't even cited for, you know, possible reports, possible suspension. There was a moment where Tom Stewart tackled a player, I think it might have been, could have been Luke Pedlar. I'm going to say it was Luke Pedlar. Tackled him, drove his head into the ground in the tackle. Now that could be deemed as a dangerous tackle, didn't even get cited. Jeremy Cameron, dangerous tackle, didn't get cited. Rory Laird got cited, got away with a fine. Brad Close got cited. Cops a Week tried to overturn it at the tribunal tonight. Unsuccessful. The roulette wheel continues to spin. A huge takeaway for both teams out of this game though. Geelong are back in form and will finish in the top 4. And Adelaide this season will play finals. I am certain of both of those things happening. The Gold Coast hosted Melbourne in a game that went down to the wire, and a 5-point victory in the end to Melbourne in a contest where I felt Gold Coast were robbed of opportunity late. And it has been a common thing that I've seen in not just this season but recent years. Umpires don't seem to have the balls to make the gutsy calls late in a game, especially when there could be implications of one team getting a free kick and then winning that game from that free kick. I don't know whether that's out of fear that they've paid it incorrectly. I don't know whether that's out of fear of not wanting to be... What the fuck just fell down there? Not wanting to be labelled as, you know, the umpire that cost X team a game or helped X team over the line. But Mabior Chol gets pushed blatantly out of a marking contest in the dying moments. No free kick. Earlier, before that, there was a holding a ball, you know, call that should have been called. Was not called. It's just, in dying moments like that, I would love to see an official take the initiative to blow the whistle and say, free kick, pay it, and, you know, do their job right. Are you with me? The biggest thing out of this game, however, was Jacob van Rooyen, the young rookie from Melbourne, takes his eyes off the ball in a contest and attempts to spoil the ball, but makes contact with the forearm to the head of Charlie Ballard, I think it was. And even though I feel it was accidental contact, he didn't swing his arm in a motion to strike. It was a clear just extension of the arm in order to punch the ball. Ballard goes down, needs to get a stretcher to come off the ground, which I still am trying to work out how he got hit in the front of the head, but when he went down, he held the back of his head as if he got punched at the back, and he copped a head knock earlier in the game from Cozzy Pickett, so it makes me wonder whether this injury was, amplified from the fact that maybe he was already suffering from potential concussion but came back onto the ground. I don't know. It's all speculation, and that's all we can really say right now. He got offered a 2-week suspension for that, challenged it tonight at the tribunal, and failed to overturn it. And we have now seen Mark Robinson on AFL 360 come out and say that Melbourne need to challenge that decision because it's bad for the AFL. And I agree. Had he had taken his eyes off the ball and swung his arm in a motion like that to strike, I would have happily turned around and said, you know what, he's taken his eyes off the ball, he's swung his arm, he's made connection, you can get him for a strike, it's hit him head high, injury has resulted because of that hit, he needs to serve a suspension. But we have seen players this year, and the best example drawing from Richmond was a few weeks ago. Noah Bolter in defence came running from one side of the field to the other, didn't have eyes on the ball, but was able to still get an effective fist in and affect the spoil and put the ball out of bounds, which answers the question, can you genuinely impact a contest without looking at the ball? Yes, you can. It takes a lot of skill to do so, but I believe you can. And I think Van Rooyen's, pure instinct here, his pure wish, was to spoil the ball, get the ball out of bounds, or at least bring it to ground to give Melbourne a scoring opportunity. His intent wasn't to hurt. His intent wasn't to strike. He didn't use any body motions that could have prevented, that hit from happening. He was already mid-flight. The argument's there that he didn't have his eyes on the ball, so he had his eyes on the player, but I still don't think he did enough to deem himself worthy of this 2-week suspension, especially given how the suspensions have been dealt with this year and who has been served with what. As I mentioned earlier, Toby Green late out for GWS. I failed to get my tip turned over to the Bulldogs, and the Bulldogs ended up winning by 15 points. I feel Toby Green definitely would have been a difference maker here. In the absence of Toby Green, on the opposite side of things, the captain for the Bulldogs, Marcus Bontempelli, stands tall and leads his team to another victory. I feel he is still easily this year the best midfielder in the competition. I think he's giving the Brownlow a really good shake, and this is coming from someone who's always had the viewpoint that I think Jack Macrae has always been robbed of votes from this team, but I don't think Jack Macrae's had that good of a year this year. I think this year there aren't many Bulldogs that are going to be polling those 3s and 2s away from Bont. When the Bulldogs have won, Bontempelli has quite easily been best on ground. And I think with a lot of people saying Nick Dacos has it in the bag, I think they might be rudely mistaken. GWS, however, still valiant in defeat, and even though I feel Toby Green would have been the difference, it was still good to see that a player that has had so much impact on this side, not only, as a player and with the talent and skill set he has, but as a leader, that GWS was still able to hang around in this game for as long as they did. A lot of people discredited GWS at the start of this season, and I think even though they're still thereabouts, this year on the ladder ranking-wise, I think they have exceeded expectations to the point where they've still been very competitive for the most part, and I don't think a lot of people expected them to be. The sour note out of this game is Adam Treloar again has found himself with a hamstring issue. It's going to leave him sidelined for a little bit. And Jamara Ugle-Hagan for the Bulldogs is suffering from a groin complaint, which could see him out injured as well. which could bode into my decision this week to tip who I'm going to tip when it comes to the round 9 tips, but we'll get to that in a minute. Fremantle not only hosted Hawthorn, but absolutely destroyed Hawthorn, and I feel this was the turning point in the road that Fremantle truly needed. They needed a momentum-boosting win. They didn't just need to fall over the line. They needed to do it convincingly. They needed to tell themselves that they are capable of playing a good brand of football when they, can string it together. That being said, it was against Hawthorn, who a lot of people tipped at the start of the year to be the final team, the last team on the ladder, the wooden spooners. So, can we take much stock out of this win from Fremantle, or is this just, a team bullying, a team that is expected to not really deliver all that much? I'm sorry if that upsets Hawthorn, supporters, but in a realistic world, that's the viewpoint that a lot of people and a lot of AFL experts have had towards Hawthorn. The good thing to see for Fremantle was Nat Fyfe coming back into the mix, but I don't like the fact that Nat Fyfe started this game off as the tactical sub. This is a dual winning Brownlow medalist. This is a man who has carried Fremantle on his shoulders for the longest period of time. This is a man who I feel still has a lot left in the tank, but is not giving the appropriate, platform to launch off of. He is not a forward. He is not a tactical sub. He is a midfielder. He needs to be in the middle. He needs to be in there helping direct traffic. He needs to be in there lending his leadership to the young kids around him. If you sub him out of the game late because he's falling a little bit short of the mark, fitness-wise or whatever the case may be, I'm all for that. As a Richmond supporter, I've seen Trent Cotchin subbed out multiple times this season. Noah Cumberland, is one of my favourite Tigers to watch currently. He got subbed out this week for little to no impact. So, if players like Nat Fyfe, fall short of the mark and it's during the third quarter or coming into the last quarter and they need something to shift in order to get the ball rolling, I can understand it. But starting a man as tactical sub with a resume as extensive as Nat Fyfe's is, I feel is a bit of a slap in the face, if you ask me, and I think a lot of people would agree. Hawthorn, on the other hand, as I said, you can't really fault. This is a team that has gone through an immediate rebuild from the ground up. This is a club that has happily allowed players like Jaeger O'Meara, Tom Mitchell, players that have been very influential to Hawthorn in previous years, to walk out, join other clubs in a bid to get draft picks and younger kids into this unit. So as these players grow up, as I've pointed out in numerous videos this year, they're going to grow up together. They're going to learn how each other play thick and thin, and then when they all hit their peak, they're going to hit their peak at the same time, and it's going to be glorious for Hawthorn fans to watch, because I feel when that moment in time comes, they could be a force to be reckoned with. They've got a lot of structure that they're building currently that is going to be very exciting when those players really come into their own. Could mean that you need to sit on the back burner for a little bit and just take the, the bumpy rides as they come. But when you hit that peak with that team, it's going to be great. Collingwood hosted Sydney at the SCG.
Hello, this is Arnold Schwarzenegger. I was the governor of California. So, Zirra was a complete douchebag and forgot to cover Port Adelaide versus Salmon in his recap. So I'm going to do it for you. Are you ready? Port Adelaide hung in a thriller after trailing by more than 5 goals. They're affirming as a top 4 team, strong enough to take on the predator in the jungle. The Salmon had a shot on goal late, but missed. That's it. Really. Time for me to hit with a chopper. Now chicha. I'll be back. Who's your daddy? And what does he do? Fuck you. Study.
In a game that was an arm wrestle early, but in the end, Collingwood doing Collingwood things, getting the job done quite convincingly in the end. Brody Myercheck with a great half volley out of mid-air that will end up being probably goal of the week. A lot of people are asking if it's goal of the year. I personally think Will Ashcroft's goal a couple of weeks ago is locked in pretty much for Goal of the Year. It's going to take something incredibly magical to knock that off its perch. The biggest talking point out of the round, however, I feel, rears its ugly head in this game. And a lot of people will probably say, oh, you know, Collingwood fans back at it again. I'm not in that boat. We know historically Adam Goodes, when he pointed out that young Collingwood fan in the crowd for calling him an ape or a monkey or whatever she called him, had her ejected out of the crowd, and I think that moment in time was fine. She deserved what was coming to her. If you're going to be a racist piece of shit, you need to be called out for it. The AFL are taking a no fuck around stance on racial abuse now at games. All 9 instances of racial abuse that have been caught so far have all been dished out with a lifetime ban. Prior to this season, racial abuse only gave you 3 years banned from the competition. You are now risking ever going to a football game live again if you want to be a racist piece of shit. And I think that is fucking great. I think you need to take a no tolerance policy on this. You know, I hate sitting in the crowd, and I've heard it many times before. And not many people know, but I come from a proud black family background, as pale as I look. And it really doesn't sit well with me hearing racial slurs towards, you know, black people, brown people, you know, whatever skin color that you see out there. People are always going to make comments about, you know, race, religion. It's fucking sad that we are still living in a world where those things are used against people in such derogatory ways. But the issue I have with this is, in the Collingwood-Sydney game, kind of... Now the issue I have, and bringing up Adam Goodes was done for a reason. Adam Goodes, after he pointed out that instance of racial abuse, obviously went through a period of time where he was consistently booed, and the narrative was directed to us that he was getting booed because he was of Aboriginal descent. He was an Aboriginal man, and, you know, people were booing him because he's black. That's pretty much what the story that was being told. And, you know, numerous apologies were made, and, you know, we've all lived through the Adam Goodes saga. On the weekend, every time Lance Franklin got a touch of the ball, he was booed by the Collingwood crowd. Now, I don't think this is a racist attack. I think Lance Franklin could be booed for many reasons. As much as he's a first ballot Hall of Fame player, and he will be in the Hall of Fame, he is still a player that has made a career of doing some unsavory things, hitting players head high, you know, things like that. And, you know, being on a high paycheck and really not delivering for Sydney, my personal opinion, could all warrant boos from the crowd. I mean, we've seen players like Jack Ginnivan from Collingwood booed, even in games where he wasn't playing and he was just on the bench, he was getting booed. You know, Jason Horne-Francis has had to endure boos from every single team he has played against this year. He hasn't even played fucking North Melbourne yet. He played for North, and every other team is fucking booing him. Both of those players are white. No narrative is driven. Lance Franklin, another proud Aboriginal man, gets booed on the weekend, and all of a sudden the narrative is now being told again that he is being booed, or they're questioning why is he being booed, and we're kind of going down that route again of Adam Goodes, and that's why I'm calling it the ArghGodzirraYT 2.0. We could be yet again going down this track, and I feel part of the reason why this narrative happened was because, you know, Horse, Sydney's coach, directed attention away from, you know, giving the green light to the Sydney players to get physically stuck into Nick Dacos, a 20-year-old second-year player. You know, let's take the narrative away from that for a second, and let's turn attention to why was Buddy getting booed. He's a legend of the game, you know. We've seen other legends of the games booed. We saw Scott Pendlebury only a couple of years ago at the Anzac Day game from the Essendon fans, probably rightfully so because the umpiring was atrocious in that game, but booed Scott Pendlebury as he was given the cup and tried to deliver his speech. And Nathan Buckley will go down in history as saying, you know, shame on you booing a champion. Kind of ironic given that it's Collingwood now booing Lance Franklin, but, you know, the stories that are now being told are, you know, people shouldn't boo at games, blah, blah, blah. People feel that, you know, they have a right to boo players because they pay for a membership. It's always been part of the theatre of going to a live game of football. You cheer for your team and you jeer the opposition. And as long as you're not doing it in a racial way, or you're not, you know, physically or verbally attacking anybody from the opposition team, I feel it's fair game. Lance Franklin isn't going to be the last player booed in their AFL career. Lance Franklin, in fact, probably won't be the last black person or Aboriginal, you know, person, or, you know, Indigenous person or foreign person to be booed at a game. Any person from any race, any religion, opens themselves up to getting booed by the opposition when they take to the field, because that's always been ingrown in this game. You're always brought up to love your team and have disregard for the others. Some supporters grow up having a genuine hate and dislike for other teams. Oh, this is going to be a narrative that's going to run for a very long time, and I fucking hate it. And the final game of the round, I thought Richmond versus the Gold Coast was terrible, but North Melbourne versus St Kilda really put their hands up to try and overtake that mantle. Holy shit. It ended up being a 30-point win to the Saints. North Melbourne are in all sorts, and I thought St Kilda would win this more convincingly, but I don't know what the Saints were doing. I don't know whether this was complacency coming in and, you know, they're coming in thinking they've already got the ball won, they've already got the game won. I don't know what it was, but St Kilda should have won this by a hell of a lot more. They should have looked a lot better than what they did. You know, it took until the last quarter to really get the ball rolling. That first half, though, can we just forget what went down? I think that's probably best. So while I tipped 8 out of 9, there were a number of people in the comp this week that got perfect rounds, so let me rattle those names off for you now. Benny Craig, Magpie Army 2016, The Blooper Reel, Saintly 12, Lizard Boy, and Macca0303, all with perfect rounds. Congratulations to each and every one of you guys for getting it done. Turning our attention, however, to the champion so far leading the league, we have an outright winner. It is Benny Craig, ladies and gentlemen, leading the competition by 2 votes. Did I say votes? I meant tips. Leading by 2 tips and doing so ahead of Saintly 12, who was on 51, and then a lot of people nipping on the heels with 50, including Rockstar Pool 69, Macca0303, Magpie Army 2016, Brighton 75, NATO, Gramercy Riff 78. It goes on and on and on. Your boy Zirra, however, is up to number 13. I am 5 tips behind the lead. There could be room this week, however, to make a couple of tips to get up that ladder. And I think it's time for me to start making some moves. Because they've taken Thursday night games away from us, Friday night is a double header. First game is at the MCG, Richmond taking on Geelong. Now, my head tells me you've got to tip Geelong. They're in form. You know, they're going to be very hard to beat. I feel Richmond have potential here to cause an upset, and I think tipping Richmond could be the differential in me this week, you know, coming up that ladder. And I'm going to do it. I'm confident my boys can get it done. I'm going to back them in by 13 points. It's going to be a close game. No Patrick Dangerfield potentially this week is going to be huge for Geelong, because he has been integral in turning Geelong's favours around. But players like Jeremy Cameron and Tom Hawkins getting off the chain up forward scares me, and Tom Stewart getting back into form defensively is worrying. I could change this tip. I could really change this tip, but I've got to do something different. And coming off of a win, I'm feeling motivated enough to think Richmond can get the job done. A lot of people probably fucking laughing at me going, thank Christ, you know, we got an easy win here against Zirra. I'm digging deep. I'm digging fucking deep. Let's go Tigers. The other game on Friday night is West Coast taking on the Gold Coast. As I said, West Coast in all sorts with their injury list could get some players back, but I feel Gold Coast were very valiant in a game against Melbourne where they very well should have won, and I think they're going to win at Optus Stadium on Friday night. Saturday afternoon opens up with Sydney versus Fremantle, even though Fremantle got a very convincing win against Hawthorn. I think Sydney back on their home deck, especially after a close loss to Collingwood, are going to be licking their lips. I think given what's just happened with Lance Franklin, he's probably looking to have a big game himself. And unfortunately, I think Fremantle are going to be dished up on the end of a quite sizable loss. I'm thinking Sydney here, probably 30 plus points. Blundstone Arena, North Melbourne, Port Adelaide. Now, you'd think North Melbourne might have the upper hand down there, and they play really good football down there. I'm not going to discredit that. But Port Adelaide are in form right now. One of the in-form teams of the comp. They're going to be hard to beat. And unfortunately, with how North Melbourne dished up their game last week against St Kilda, that's going to open the door for Port Adelaide to win by 10 goals. I had to laugh about this game because on Fox Footy, they are advertising Hawthorn Melbourne and Carlton Bulldogs as blockbuster games. Now, Carlton Bulldogs I can get behind. Hawthorn Melbourne, given the scope of some of the beltings Melbourne have dished out this year and some of the beltings that Hawthorn have been on the back end of this year, kind of laughable. Considering I think Melbourne's going to absolutely destroy Hawthorn. If Hawthorn can get within 40 points, I'll be incredibly impressed, and I'd be questioning why Melbourne didn't put the foot on the throat. Gabba, Brisbane, Essendon. Gabba says it all, ladies and gentlemen. You lock in Brisbane. One of, again, the in-team forms of the comp. They're now starting to win games away from the Gabba. They're growing in confidence. They're going to be very hard to stop. Essendon, on the other hand, still playing some really good football, even in games that they're losing in. So, going to be interesting to see what they can dish up against the Lions, but I think the Lions are going to be too hard to beat. Carlton Bulldogs. As I pointed out, no Adam Treloar for the Bulldogs. No Euclid Hagen potentially for the Bulldogs. Sam Darcy is going to miss a month after finding a hole in his lung, which is stopping some, breathing issues from going on. So Sam Darcy potentially was going to come in as a replacement for Euclid Hagen. He now goes down. That leaves only Aaron Norton up forward as the big tall target. Well, Rory Lobb as well, but Rory Lobb I don't think gets off the chain too much to be worried about. Carlton's defense I think can lock that down. If Curnow and Mackay can start getting things moving, this is the week they can do it. I think they can expose that back line. I think Charlie Curnow can have Liam Jones's number. I feel Mackay getting up the ground a little bit can get the better of an Alex Keith, a Josh Bruce, those kind of players. I'm actually going to back in Carlton to get the job done against the Doggies. Adelaide Oval, Adelaide versus St Kilda. Adelaide's going to be playing finals this year, as I said. I'm comfortable enough to lock that in. They're playing a really good brand. They're going to be hard to beat at home. Had St Kilda have beaten North Melbourne more convincingly, I might have been inclined to go St Kilda here, but not the way they played against North. You'd be crazy to back against Adelaide here. And the final game of the round, unfortunately for the 1% of people that think GWS might get up, Collingwood at the MCG is as big as a lock as you'll have all year this year. They're going to get the job done. 30 plus points, continue to hold that number one spot on top of the ladder. Reflecting on my tips, we're rolling the dice with Richmond, but we're going with the Gold Coast, Sydney, Port Adelaide, Melbourne, Brisbane, Carlton, Adelaide, and Collingwood. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join me for yet another video. If you could be so kind as to hit that like button, I would appreciate it a lot. And consider hitting that subscribe button as well to hang around for a good time. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here. Good luck to your teams this weekend. And as always, I will catch you guys next time.